Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, depending on which part of the world you are. I'm here in Sydney, Australia. Welcome to the channel and I hope you guys are doing great. Now, today we'll be talking about a very controversial figure. His name is Dr. Yasir Qadhi. He's a Muslim apologist and recently he made a video about the temple inauguration in Ayodhya, the Ram temple. And during that lecture, he made a couple of comments about the history of the place, the religious tensions that surround the issues of Babri Mosjid, and obviously he tried to vilify the Hindus for those religious tensions that has been going on for a couple of centuries now. Now, in this video, I would like to analyze some of the things that he had said, he has pointed out. And as you can imagine, I'll be very critical of this individual. And within this conversation, I am also hoping to learn something new. So the information that I'm going to present to you, if you find this information to be inauthentic, is false, please call me out. Please do make an effort to correct me. As I said, I'm trying to learn something new out of this conversation. So this video is titled The Tragedy of Babri Mosjid and Some Truth About Hindustan. Now I want to highlight this point, truth. Okay, this is to me is very ironic because some of the thing that he said is completely out of place, is totally fabricated. That is what I'm going to prove. And as we go through this discussion, I am also trying to learn something new. So please do make an effort to correct me if you come across the information that I am presenting is false. So without further ado, let's dive in. Let's see what he has to say, and based on his comment, I will make my observations. And again, I expect that you will correct me if you happen to find out some of the informations that I'm going to present to be untrue.
In the 16th century, I'm saying from their perspective, an outsider force came, a barbarian, uncivilized, uncouth group of people, the Turkic fanatics, the Muslims, under the command of Babur, one of the descendants of Tamerlane. And he pillaged and plundered and raped the land of India. This is their perspective. And he demolished their iconic symbol, which is the temple of Ram. And in its place, he built a masjid. So from their mythology,
in its place, in the place of the temple, he built a masjid from the perspective of the mythology. So he is trying to come to this discussion by saying that this temple, the Ram temple, is nothing but a mythology.
the destruction of the masjid and the reinstating of the temple has deep symbolic meaning. It is as if they are stripping India of the influence of the foreigner. Again, this is their mythology, please understand. This says, I'm looking at history from their perspective.
It is their mythology. It is their mythology. Mythology is the key word here. Okay. So now let's talk about this for a minute. So what is the actually historical significance of this Ramayana, this epic? There are two epics in the history of India. Like if you study Indian history, then Ramayanas and Mahabharatas, these are the two epics that come out of India. So what is the historical significance of this particular epic, the epic of Ramayana? Now, let me quickly show you a clip.
So the Ramayana has many, it's an immense piece of our history. There are so many episodes, such detailed things that happen that span the entire length and breadth of our subcontinent. So it's a massive event across almost the entirety of our geography. And one of the epochal, pivotal events in the Mahabharata, in the Ramayan, sorry, is the construction of an artificial land bridge between southern India and the island of Lanka. And this has been considered to be a myth for the entirety of the British occupation of India. And even after independence, our mentally colonized historians have kept on insisting that this is a myth. And unfortunately for their narrative, it is a couple of American universities that have recently discovered and proved that this land bridge, which is known as Adam's Bridge for some reason, which is actually Ramasetu, they have demonstrated that this land bridge, this land connection is man-made. It is artificial. The stones are artificial over there. They have been artificially placed there. So this has been proved by two different separate American universities, right? So it's clear that this so-called mythological tale has turned out to be true. And if this central tale of the Ramayan is true, it means that the Ramayan actually happened, right? And what these scientists discovered was that this man-made bridge is at least 7,000 years old. It may be older than that. We still don't know for sure. Our government and our historians, our archaeologists, our scientists have thus far not taken the initiative of going there and doing some actual testing and trying to determine the date of this land connection. So when we do this, when this is eventually done, we will have a better idea of when this land bridge was constructed. And then we will know whether it is 7,000 years old or 10,000 years old or however old or young it is. So as of now, I can say that it's at least 7,000 years old. Now, your second part of the question is, why don't we find evidences that old in Ayodhya?
Okay, so Adam's Bridge. Okay, as you heard this gentleman explaining that there is a 5,000-mile bridge, and this is how the epic has been described. Epic has been written. So let's go back to our scholar, Dr. Yasir Qadhi. So his point was that this is a complete myth. You saw him say it many times. Mythology, mythology, mythology. He repeatedly said about mythology.
These Hindutva groups, primarily the RSS and the BJP, again, I've spoken about these two groups in other lectures. The RSS and the BJP are the two main Hindutva groups. If you don't know what Hindutva is, I have to quickly clarify or explain. Hindutva is an ideology that is religious, it is political, it is ethnic altogether. It is an ideology that is religious, political, and ethnic, and which claims that India should only belong to the Hindus. This is an ideology.
Okay. India should only belong to the Hindus. Now, based on the historical evidence, there has been numerous evidence of riots, communal violence. Would you like to live next door to a terrorist? This would be my question. As he was saying that India should belong only to the Hindus. Now, I don't see any reason as to why would you like to live next door to a terrorist. There are always religious tensions exist. Right now, as I make this video, there is a case going on with Israel and Gaza. What happened on 7th of October? A bunch of terrorists ravaged Israel. Beheading of the babies. Like, I made separate videos on the violence, the sheer depravity that has been manifested on 7th of October. Women, gang raping of women, burning families alive. Members of the same family, burning them together, beheading. Anything and everything that you can imagine, and anything and everything that you even can't imagine, it happened on just 100 days ago. There are religious tension exist, not just today, for centuries. Is it unjustifiable that some people like Hindutva, the RSS, they are not the entirety of the Bharat, entirety of the Hindu community that live in India, but let's say a significant majority who supports this Hindutva. Would it be unjustifiable for them to say that, oh, look, based on whatever happened in history, we don't want to live next door to a terrorist? Is this desire completely unjustified?
Hindutva. And there are a number of political organizations that are affiliated with the Hindutva. It used to be RSS was number one. RSS went its up and down. The BJP came recently, and now the BJP is now the dominant party that is manifesting Hindutva. So, from the perspective of Hindutva, the demolishing of the temple and the demolishing of the masjid and the reinstating of the temple is a reclaiming of their original heritage and a manifestation of the erasure of Muslim influence. We're going to come back to this symbolism. Now, what is the actual history, not the mythology? What is the academic history of this region? The mythical city of Ayodhya.
Actual history, academic history. I want you to highlight these points. Okay.
Has nothing to do with the current city as it stands.
The mythical city has nothing to do with the current city as it stands. All right. Let me show you another clip. This is Dr. Meenakshi Jain, one of the front runners in this battle, like the dispute of Babri Mosjid that went to the court, and she was one of the front runners in the motion. So let's see what she has to say.
The Ram Temple. You see, the Ram Temple is the first case where the Hindus have actually got back a site after 500 years of struggle, and that through court intervention. But during the time that they did not have any power and that masjid has been built over there, they never surrendered that site. That is the most, when I studied this phenomena at Ayodhya, I was not aware that this is replicated in every sacred site that we want to study.
Okay.
So in Ayodhya, we know that the temple was destroyed by Babur in 1528. And perhaps not so well known is the fact that the masjid party in court was not able to produce one bit of evidence to show that they were there from 1528 to 1858.
Okay.
I want you to highlight this point. So they never surrendered that site. When a temple was destroyed, Hindus never surrendered that site. And on top, she mentioned this very specific fact. From 1528 till 1858, not a single document was produced to show that there was any significant Muslim presence or any Muslim presence for that matter on that site.
For over 300 years, there is no evidence of Muslim presence at that site.
No evidence.
Now, what does it mean? It means it's a case of smash and grab.
Case of smash and grab. I want you to highlight this point.
That Babur just wanted to demolish a particular temple. And he occupied that space, and that's the end of the story.
Okay.
Perhaps there were not that many Muslims to offer namaz over there. But the fact is that when we talk about contesting claims, the Hindu claim at that site is so well documented that it is amazing. Now, I would like to give you the first evidence that we have. It is of an English traveler to India. His name was William Finch. He came around 1604 or 1608. And so he is traveling wherever he is going, he is writing his account. And he doesn't know that this account is going to be used 400-500 years later.
Right.
This is William Finch. that he was writing about this the evidence that was used in the court.
In any case, he comes to Ayodhya and he goes to that site. And he says that, Hindus come here, they take a dip in the Saryu river. And, there are Pandits who record the names of these people who have come. And when they go back, they take black burnt grain with them. Now, that is something which needs to be explained because that has a lot of significance.
Okay.
All right. Then the next account is by a Jesuit traveler. I can't call him a traveler because he lived
Jesuit traveler. Again, we will see why this Jesuit traveler is important in a bit. Okay, let's see what she has to say.
in India for 40 years.
Okay.
And he even died in India and is buried in India.
I see.
So he wrote copiously because he was interested in science, mathematics, so many other things. And in his work on Ayodhya, he lived in this area for 7 years.
Okay.
He lived in India for 40 years, but in this Awadh area for 7 years.
Okay.
And his account is very, very significant because he's the first person to say, he provides sketches of the building, and he's the first person to say that, the Hindus have created a Vedi. Vedi means Vedi or cradle.
Okay.
Cradle is for a newborn.
Of course.
So he says they have created a Vedi and they come and circumambulate around it. And on Ram Navami, he mentions Ram Navami, so many people come. So these are eyewitness accounts of Hindu presence at that site. And then, we have
a
this
cradle, people circling around that cradle and Ram Navami. I need to highlight these 3 points. Let's move on.
Officer of the Faizabad District Court. In 1822, he filed a report in the Faizabad District Court and he says that Babri Mosjid was built on the temple and it is next to Sita Ki Rasoi.
Okay.
So he is saying that Babri Masjid is built on the Janmasthan temple. After that, I forgot to mention one more thing. That, Akbar, Emperor Akbar, he gave 6 bighas of land to Hanuman Tila.
Okay.
Hanuman Tila is very near the Janmasthan in Ayodhya.
Okay.
And that grant that he gave had to be renewed about 100 years later by a subsequent Mughal emperor. So the grant is renewed and the person who writes that imperial order, he says that, this emperor has renewed this grant for 6 bighas of land to Hanuman Tila. I am writing this imperial order. I'm writing it from the Janmasthan of Ram.
Okay.
He is writing in Persian.
Okay.
And he's just copying the imperial order so that it can be handed over to Hanuman Tila or wherever. And he's saying, I'm writing this imperial order from the Janmasthan of Ram. So, there are many of these accounts in Persian, in Urdu later on. And all these accounts that were written in the 18th, 19th century, they say that Babri Masjid was built on the site of the Ram temple.
Okay.
There is no account that I'm aware of that was written in the medieval period in Arabic, Persian or Urdu, which says that Babri Masjid was built on vacant land.
Okay.
All right. So, accounts that were written in medieval period in Persian, in Arabic or Urdu, none of these accounts mention that Babri Mosjid was built on vacant land. Not only did they say that, they also say that this was built on top of the Ram temple.
They're all unanimous that it was built on the site of the Ram temple. And what is very interesting. I think it was Lord Ram trying to protect his territory, that, in the British period, many cases were filed between the Mahants and the Mutawallis of the Masjid. Because the Mahants were, you see, when I talk about Masjid, I have to clarify that there is a compound. In that compound, there is the Masjid, and the rest is vacant land within the boundary. So
there is still vacant land within the boundary. Okay, so now let's go back to Dr. Yasir Qadhi.
This is like, talk about any mythical city in any ancient book, and then a civilization comes and says, you know what, we're going to name our city after that mythical city. There's actually no correlation, because the Vedas were written thousands of years.
There is actually no correlation. All the things that you just heard, the records, Urdu, Arabic or Persian, none of the records suggest that this was built on a vacant land. What he has to say?
And this city only got its name a few centuries ago. So actually, in reality, firstly, from an academic perspective, the mythical city never really existed, or even if it did, it has nothing to do with the actual city standing here today.
It has nothing to do with the actual city standing here today. That I am writing, the Hanuman Tila, Dr. Meenakshi Jain was explaining that the decree, the imperial decree about Hanuman Tila, that 100 years that was renewed, that I am writing from Ram Janmabhoomi. He just made a comment that it's a mythical city. Now I showed you just a few minutes ago about the Adams Bridge, 5,000-mile bridge, which is part of the epic Ramayanas, that connects India and Lanka. And again, none of these things even remotely mentioned in his speech. And forget about that one, the Adams Bridge. Even the imperial decree that I am writing from Ram Janmabhoomi, that no Muslim presence between 1528 and 1858. Okay, for 300 years. Now, he will refute, Dr. Yasir Qadhi will refute his own claim in a bit. So let's continue what he has to say. But I want you to remember these key points, the 300 years of without any Muslim presence. Okay, this is one of the key points that Dr. Yasir Qadhi himself will refute in a minute. Just bear with me.
No person outside of the Hindu faith believes in the existence of Rama and Krishna and whatnot, much less the birth of Rama in a particular temple or city. So obviously this is legend, it's not actual fact. From the perspective of pure history, no religiosity, no mythology, the structure that stood there before the construction of the temple was in fact a masjid, and it was built.
The structure that stood there before the temple, before the Ram temple was inaugurated, was a masjid. But you heard from Dr. Meenakshi Jain that 300 years, no Muslim presence whatsoever. And the comment he just made, again, he is going to refute his own comment in a minute.
We don't even know who it was built by. One theory says Babur, another theory says Aurangzeb, and a third theory says by the Delhi sultans before the coming of Babur. To be very factual, very historic, we are actually not certain who built the masjid. It is an old masjid. Some say it actually predates the Mughal Empire. And the reason why they say this is because the architectural structure resembles that of the Delhi sultans more than that of the Mughals. Others say this is from Aurangzeb. But the majority say that it is from the time of Babur. And they say, as for the resembling of the architectural structure, the reason being Babur was the first Mughal, he didn't really start new architecture right now. So he took the existing styles, which is that of the Delhi sultans, and he constructed a masjid in this region or in this area. So for sure, we know a masjid has stood there for 500 years.
For sure? A masjid stood there for how long? 500 years.
It's built, we don't know exactly when. One report says 1526. Again, because the beginnings of this masjid are shrouded in history. Now, Babur was the founder of the Mughal dynasty. And Babur was a very literate person, very educated.
Babur was a very literate person. We will come back. We'll come back to this point in a minute. But I want you to highlight this.
Person. In fact, Babur wrote poetry. And Babur was one of the first people in all of Muslim history to write a detailed autobiography. You know this. Babur wrote his own life and times. And it is called the Babur Nama. And it is available, even in English, that has been translated. Babur wrote his own, he literally writes day by day, a journal. One of the only Muslim rulers in all of our history to write a journal and chronicle. And it is published and available. And he writes in meticulous detail, sometimes even the meals that he had, sometimes even the fun and games, sometimes even the trivial. In the Babur Nama, he does not mention the building of this masjid. He doesn't mention it.
In the Babur Nama, he doesn't mention building of this masjid. See, there is an overlap. Dr. Meenakshi Jain was saying that for 300 years, there is no Muslim presence, no document. The masjid party haven't been able to produce one bit of document supporting the claim that there was a masjid. And as you just saw him explaining that in the Babur Nama, Babur's own memoir, this hasn't been documented. He just said, just a minute ago, for 500 years, for sure, for 500 years, the masjid stood there. And just now, he said that in Babur Nama, this masjid hasn't been mentioned.
One of the theories why they say, either he didn't build it, or maybe it was built in his time, but it wasn't of that importance. It's going to become important later on.
It is not that important. As Dr. Meenakshi Jain was saying, is it just a snatch, like a smash and grab? Thousands of temples have been destroyed. Let me quickly show you a couple of these examples. Again, this will be a recurrent theme. Now, first of all, what is Kaaba? Kaaba is a Hindu shrine. When Muhammad came to Mecca, there were 360 idols in Kaaba. 360 idols in Kaaba. He destroyed all of them. So this Kaaba is a pagan polytheistic shrine, religious site of the polytheists, of the Hindus, so to speak. And this was converted, not just converted, this is one of the holiest places of present-day Islam. Okay, now let me show you a couple of other examples. Babri Mosque. I will quickly go through these names so that you can take a look at which mosques have been converted. Like there are thousands of mosques that has been destroyed. Again, we are trying to highlight the point, smash and grab. As Dr. Meenakshi Jain was explaining, the smash and grab, we are trying to highlight the point that she was trying to make. There are just a couple of examples. Krishna Janmabhoomi Temple Complex, Rudra Mahalaya Temple, these are all converted to mosque at some point. Kamal Maula Mosque, all of these things are in Wikipedia, you can check all the references. Adina Mosque, Bhadrakali Temple turned into Jame Mosque, Somnath Temple. Now, let's actually quickly go back to the Somnath Temple because this is very, very important. Okay, we will come back to Dr. Yasir Qadhi in a minute. But this Somnath Temple tells a different story of this whole dispute. Okay, let's quickly go back to this clip over here.
For me too.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. So the last time we had discussed Sati, we did a virtual podcast. It's
Yes.
finally great to have you face to face.
Yeah, me too.
And I would like to discuss I would like to learn from you about a number of things. So, for example, I am not really well versed in medieval Indian history. I have not really studied the Ram Mandir, Ram Janmabhoomi case, the Krishna Janmabhoomi case. It's painful. So that's why I've kept away from it. But I would, and you have been instrumental through your work, through your research, in fortifying the case, in providing the evidence that led to the court judgment in favor of the Ram Janmabhoomi trust in the Hindus. So I would like to learn about the history of this entire matter, the temple, the history behind it, and the court case, and how it was cracked from you. So could you please?
Before I begin discussing the Ram Mandir case,
Yes.
As a historian, I would like to tell you that every case of temple vandalism in the medieval period has been documented by people who vandalized the temple. And it is also not so well known that the people who were affected, that means the ordinary devotees, the temple priests and all that, from the time that any temple was demolished, they made concerted efforts to rebuild the temple. So obviously when they tried to rebuild the temple could not be of the scale and grandeur of the temple that had been destroyed, because we must realize that political power was not in the hands of the worshippers, and nor did they have that economic might. So in many cases, they rebuilt those temples in a very small, humble way.
Okay.
But they kept the name of the original temple alive. So, you will see Somnath, before we come to Ayodhya.
Yes.
Somnath was destroyed again and again and again.
Yes.
We know that it was destroyed first by Mahmud Ghaznavi, and perhaps we do not know that the last time it was destroyed was by Emperor Aurangzeb. So there are a series of attacks. Alauddin Khalji attacked it, all well documented. Now the question can arise that if the temple was demolished by Mahmud Ghaznavi, why was it attacked again and again and again? And the simple answer is that the devotees went on building that Somnath temple. So this is a story that is, so inspiring and so humbling that, ordinary devotees, they were just so committed to their deity that they could not bear the thought that there will be no shrine to that deity. So, and the last attempt was by Aurangzeb when he was over 80 years old.
Okay.
So Aurangzeb sends a farman to his governor in Gujarat and says, these Hindus, they have the capacity to go on and on worshipping at those shrines. So now you go to Somnath and make sure that they have not revived worship at that place. And if they have, then destroy it in such a manner that it can never be, worship cannot take place at that shrine again. So, when we make these unworthy comments that the temples were attacked only for their wealth, when the temples were being attacked, there was no wealth attached to them. They were small, modest structures. But every time they kept the same name. The Somnath temple may have been built 6 times, but it always kept the name Somnath. So that is a stirring story, which unfortunately has receded from our memory in the last 40-50 years.
Okay.
That we can discuss later. But this is a story that as you mentioned, it's very evident in Ayodhya. It is so well documented in the case of Mathura, with inscriptions going back. We'll come to that later.
Yes.
But to come to the Ram temple.
Okay, so you just heard from Dr. Meenakshi Jain as she was explaining that the case for Somnath, which has been destroyed many times, like at least 6 times, and it was built again and again and again. And the reason for it was being destroyed again and again and again was because of the hatred towards that structure, that, as Aurangzeb was saying, that are destroyed in such a way that they cannot come and worship here anymore. Okay, so this is the Somnath temple, and this is the story, the rebuilding of the temple and the redestruction of the temple. This tells, or this creates a different dimension of this entire conflict in this region, this conflict of civilizations in this entire region. And I'd like you to understand the core of this dispute based on this one particular example. So Somnath temple, again, we are discussing about some of the temples that has been converted to mosque. And there is another one, again, all the information is in Wikipedia, is in public domain. You can go through and check out for yourself. Again, Aurangzeb, one of the names that comes repeatedly. All the Mughal empire emperors, pretty much, they all did the same thing. Whether it's Delhi Sultanate, the Mughal emperors, or Tamerlane, or like the early Islamic rulers, the Ghaznavi, Mahmud of Ghazni, bin Qasim, they all did these kind of things all throughout 800 years of India's history. Okay, so now let's go back to our Dr. Yasir Qadhi. And yeah.
We know historically the masjid's name was not the Babri Masjid throughout the 15th, 16th, 17th century. It had another name.
So again, he is pointing to the 15th, 16th, and 17th century, the 300 years that Dr. Meenakshi Jain was explaining, that those Masjid party haven't been able to produce one bit of evidence to claim that there was any significant Muslim presence on that site.
The Babri Masjid, of course, Babri means built by Babur. That's why. The term Babri Masjid only came into vogue in the last 100, 150 years. So historically speaking, we are not even certain who built the masjid. And this is not a very important point, but academically you should be aware. Historically, the origins are shrouded in antiquity. One of the first mentions we have of this masjid in Western sources is around 1750. A Christian Jesuit priest traveled through India.
It's not 1750, the Jesuit priest is William Finch. Okay, just a quick correction. So, but again, the Jesuit priest that we have been discussing before now comes into his discussion as well. Let's see what he has to say.
A chronicle of his journey. And if you want to find his name in writings, it is translated in English as well. His name is Joseph Tieffenthaler. Joseph Tieffenthaler. So this Jesuit priest went through Ayodhya, and he mentions, listen to this, the existence of a large masjid.
He never mentioned it. He never mentioned existence of a large masjid. All he was saying, like I googled it, and I couldn't find him say anywhere that there's a large masjid. It never existed. Again, the 300 years that we are talking about, there is no mention of existence of a temple, existence of a mosque. Okay, so that's the complete lie, complete fabrication, let alone masjid. There is no Muslim presence in that site. Okay, so he never mentioned about any of these things.
Which some say was built by Aurangzeb, he says this. And some say was built by Babur. So he himself, writing in 1750, saying, this is a beautiful, nice masjid. Some say Aurangzeb built...
300 years, not a single document. 300 years, not a single document. Again, Meenakshi Jain also confirmed this Jesuit priest, the Tieffenthaler, Mr. Joseph Tieffenthaler. Okay, he mentioned about this Jesuit priest, but he was talking about a cradle. And on Ram Navami, it's very important date for people who are coming from Indic background. On Ram Navami, people will be, circling around that cradle. It has about 12 pillars or something. The large masjid. It was no large masjid. It was a temple that was destroyed, and inside those pillars there was this cradle, and people are circling that cradle on that particular date, which is like yearly on that particular date, Ram Navami. very significant in Indian history, in the history of the rituals that surround the existence of Lord Rama. Okay, so let's continue. Again, it's a total fabrication of what he just said.
Some say Babur built it, and he describes the masjid. There's three domes on it. You'll be able to see color pictures of the masjid because it was demolished in 1992. So we have color pictures. So he describes the three domes. He describes some of the beauty inside. He describes one of the unique things that the Delhi Sultanate and also the Mughal Empire was known for. And that is, all the Indian Pakistanis know this. If you go to one of the ancient Mughal and Delhi Sultanate structures and masjids, they have acoustics down to an unbelievable science. How many have visited the masjid in Lahore? That famous masjid in Lahore. You know, when you give a whisper in one side, right? The Bachahi Masjid. When you give a whisper in one side, you can hear it from the other side. By the way, I swear to you, this is so mind-boggling. I mean, I had heard this. I said, come on, it can't be true. 2 years ago, when I visited for the first time as an adult, I went as a child before. I went as an adult and I tested it myself. You know, my wife was on the other side of the masjid. I told her to whisper in the corner there. And I stood there and I could hear crystal clear. Still, how they did this, I have no clue. Even the clock ticking, you hear it. Yes, you can hear the clock ticking. So this Jesuit priest describes this phenomenon inside the masjid. That when somebody speaks at a certain place, they're able to project the acoustics to the whole masjid. So he's marveling. I've never seen this in my life. He's chronicling this. So what is important for us? Back to our story here. I have to keep tangents to a minimum because there's so much to say and time is limited. The Jesuit priest writes, outside of the masjid, there is a raised platform that the local Hindus venerate because they think their god Rama was born there.
Okay, this is now again, coming back to Dr. Meenakshi Jain, she also mentioned about in that complex there was vacant area. Like as she was saying that it was not built on a vacant land. That was the first thing that in all the chronicles, like Arabic, Persian, or Urdu chronicles, none of them has mentioned that it was built on a vacant land. It was all built on top of the mosque. On top of the temple. And within that complex, there are this vacant space, vacant area within that temple complex. Okay. Now, he also tried to mention about the science and arts and all those things. So we're going to come back to this, the marbles that, have you seen a temple in Lahore, Masjid in Lahore, that you speak from one end, you hear the other side. We will come back to this science in a bit. Just bear with me for a moment.
The historic fact that from 1750, there are two places separate from one another, but in visual distance. No riots, no animosity, no fighting. Here's
no riots, no animosity, no fighting. One more time. No riots, no animosity, no fighting.
Delhi, if I see the city from where I come from, the oldest church is in Kashmiri Gate. It is 250 years old. There are huge mosques that dot the sky all over the city. They are medieval mosques, they are huge, but there are no medieval temples. Now, we Hindus who had Shilpa Shastra to make massive temples, where there are so many temples in the south, why is it that we did not think of even building a temple till as late as 1939? That's a question that I think our future generation is going to ask us. And I think the reason lies in that the structure, the temple would be broken down, destroyed, the deities would be trampled upon, it would bring further annihilation and loss and death, and there may be more conversions or forced jizya, that is to pay tax. These fears, I think, dominated the Hindu psyche for centuries and still dominates it.
Okay, so no riots, no animosity, and of course, as he was explaining that is all about tolerance. That is essentially what he was trying to say, that within this temple compound, no incident of riot, animosity, or fight.
Masjid, and there is a small temple. This is the masjid, beautiful. This is the temple. The Hindus are venerating it, thinking that Rama was born there. This clearly indicates that there were two separate facilities in close vicinity to one another, and nothing major is going on. The first person to claim that the
Nothing major is going on. There are two facilities in close proximity. Nothing major is going on. So what are the other incidents? What are the other instances of these kind of closed facilities? Now let me show you the Dome of the Rock. This is in Jerusalem, and you can see the Alaska Mosque. I wonder why. Okay, one other example. This is again Hagia Sophia has been converted to a mosque. Again, all of these examples, the examples that I have shown you, that there are, if you do an archaeological digging all over the world, many uncomfortable truths will come out, and especially in India. This is significantly true in case of India. In case of India, this is significantly the case, that many uncomfortable truths will come out if you do a digging. So, no riots, no animosity. I mean, honestly, do you believe this? Do you buy this nonsense? Do you honestly believe this nonsense? What is the Islamic view towards the polytheists? What does Islam preaches towards unbelievers? Let me quickly show you a couple of examples. One of the things that Islam teaches, lying and deception. One of the things that Islam teaches is one of the fundamental doctrine of Islam is to lie and deceive people. So let's talk about the view towards the polytheists. This is the verse of the sword, one of the key verses of Quran. When the sacred months have passed, slay the idolaters wherever you find them. Take them captive, besiege them, and prepare for them at every ambush. But if they repent and establish worship and pay the poor due, then leave their way free. Allah is forgiving, merciful. This is the verse of the sword, the chapter 9, Surah Tawbah, chapter 9, verse 5. When the sacred months have passed, and it's talking about killing the idolaters like the Hindus, and of course the people of the book as well. Lie in wait at every ambush to kill them. We have more. We have many more. Chapter 98, verse 6. Those who disbelieve among the people of the scripture and idolaters, again talking about the Hindus, will abide in the fire of hell. They are the worst of created beings. They are the worst of all creatures. This is the view towards the Hindus by Quran. According to Quran, these are the views towards the idolaters, towards infidel. And Dr. Yasir Qadhi was saying that no instances of animosity and fighting. I mean, do you honestly believe this kind of nonsense? Now, in terms of evidence, let me show you one other piece of evidence before we move on.
Touching it. Now, here is a photograph of the mosque and the trench on this western side. This is the wall of the mosque, This is of course the peripheral wall, a sort of retaining wall. Now from here downwards, we have different levels. Say the early medieval levels, the Gupta levels, Kushan levels, Shunga levels, and further to the 3rd, 4th century BC. In the deep trench here, which you cannot see right now, we went further down about 7 or 8 feet. And in the lowest levels in this trench, we found material such like the northern black polished ware and other things, which go back to about 700 before Christ. This is the lowest deposit, and this probably is the time of Lord Ram, because similar evidence comes from other places like Shrangverpur, Bharadwaj Ashram, Chitrakoot, which are associated with the Ram story. And a similar trench was put on the southern side of the mosque, where again we went to the seven.
Okay, you can listen to that as he was explaining that this was archaeological digging by Professor B.B. Lal, and the evidence he put forth, I believe, in terms of what he said, that there was a mosque standing for sure 500 years and all those things. If you do like a Google search for 5 minutes, or let's say half an hour, you will find this evidence, the information that I have provided. You will find all this information. And Yasir Qadhi was saying that, oh, as a mosque stood there for 500 years, for sure, all of these things. He's making things up. He's completely lying. He's totally fabricating this entire narrative just to gain a few points. Or may I say, just to deceive the viewers. As in Quran, it clearly says in Quran that Allah is the best of the deceivers. Allah is the best of the deceivers. This is what Quran says. It's not something that I'm making up. This is what Quran says, that Allah is the best of the deceivers. This is chapter 3 verse 54, and you also have chapter 8 verse 30. Chapter 8 verse 30. It says that Allah is the best of the plotters. He deceives people. He lies. So I don't know which one I should take, whether this should be taken as word of God, but clearly it says so. And Yasir Qadhi was probably taking lessons from his own scripture when he was trying to fabricate all these different stories. Okay, so again, this chapter 9.5, the views towards idolaters, towards infidel. Very, 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 very inflammatory. Okay, let's continue what he has to say.
Masjid was built on a temple. The first person to claim this was a British civil servant by the name of Montgomery Martin. Montgomery Martin in the 1830s. He was the first person to lay this seed in the minds of the people. Why he did so, we're going to come back later on.
So this was Montgomery Martin who laid the seed. And the stuff that I have shown you, the idolaters, the slay the idolaters, lie in wait for them in every ambush, and Allah is the best of the schemers, lying, deceiving people, deceiving the infidel. There was no seed has been sown in all of these teachings. It was a British civil servant who sowed the seed of, so to speak, hatred in the minds of the followers of the or in the minds of the Hindus, according to Dr. Yasir Qadhi. Now, do you honestly believe this kind of nonsense? This is the evidence that I have shown you. This is the evidence presented in the court. This is the evidence that is confirmed by many scholars. Okay, and he was trying to create a narrative that, okay, there was a mosque stood for 500 years, blah, blah, blah. No record exists for 300 years, no significant presence, no significant Muslim presence exists. That was one of the requirements of the court. No evidence has been provided to the court when this case was filed. No evidence could be provided. And he was saying that, on top, he was, as he was, being very animated, on top, it was Mr. Martin. He was blaming Mr. Martin to sowing of the seed.
A British civil servant begins this seed. And that seed is what? The temple, the masjid, is actually built on the ruins of a temple. And not surprisingly, as soon as the British Raj comes into power, the Mughal Sultanate comes to an end in 1857, the mutiny or the War of Independence. The first time a riot takes place between Muslims and Hindus over the masjid is under the British Raj in 1859. This is a very important fact. For 300 years, not a single Muslim or Hindu has fought in this region. There has never been a Muslim-Hindu riot from the beginning. Surprise, surprise, the British come along.
There never been a Hindu-Muslim riot from the beginning. Let's listen to this one more time.
In Delhi, if I see the city from where I come from, the oldest church is in Kashmiri Gate. It is 250 years old. There are huge mosques that dot the sky all over the city. They are medieval mosques, they are huge, but there are no medieval temples. Now, we Hindus who had Shilpa Shastra to make massive temples, where there are so many temples in the south, why is it that we did not think of even building a temple till as late as 1939? That's a question that I think our future generation is going to ask us. And I think the reason lies in that the structure of the temple would be broken down, destroyed, the deities would be trampled upon, it would bring further annihilation and loss and death, and there may be more conversions or forced jizya, that is to pay tax. These fears, I think, dominated the Hindu psyche for centuries and still dominates it.
See? And no riots, no fights, nothing. See, when we are trying to, when we are trying to engage into a conversation with the Muslims, this is one of the problems that occur, that the lying, the deception, that fooling around. What was the biggest lie, if I may ask you, what was the biggest lie that you have ever been told in your entire life? Like that the Islam is the religion of peace. This is the biggest lie. In my humble opinion, this is the biggest lie that humanity has ever been fed. No other culture, no other community has deceived people as much as Muslims did, to cover the sheer depravity. What do you see Hamas, the beheadings, the rapings, the burnings? Is this something new? Is this something 21st century? Absolutely not. You saw ISIS, you saw Hamas, Boko Haram, Bin Laden, Al-Qaeda. All of these things are happening for 1500 years. We just don't know about it. The evidence is so vast. It's so mounting. If you buy this kind of nonsense, you are just a fool. If you, after seeing this evidence, after listening to different types of perspectives, if you think that he is the one telling you the truth, then the only thing I can say that you are just fooling around. You were just being made a sheep, just like these people who are sitting here like sheeps. You were just being made one of those sheeps.
And lo and behold, the riots begin. 1859, After the mutiny, some local Brahman priests declared that this masjid was built on holy land. And they raised a mob, attacked the masjid, laid siege to the masjid, prevented people from praying Jumu'ah. Violence occurred, some people died. The British troops came in and they restored order and they gave it back to the Muslims. This is the first time there is a clash. Not under the Mughals, not under the Rajputs, not under the Marathas, nobody's doing anything. The British come and now Hindu-Muslim are fighting. I'm going to come back to this point. In 1885, a few years later, the Brahman priests launch a petition with the British Raj, a legal suing. They want this property back. They say this was originally ours. The Muslims don't deserve it. This is the first time this notion is appearing in our history records, that the Hindus are claiming the Muslims do not deserve this. The petition is not given attention and it has remained under Muslim territory. But the rhetoric has begun. And in the riots of 1930s, in the 1930s, under the end of the British Raj, was when Hindu-Muslim riots really went mainstream. And again, we're going to explain why at the end of this lecture today. In 1930s, again, Ayodhya became a part of the Hindu-Muslim riots. And mobs broke out. Multiple people lost their lives fighting for the right to enter the masjid. The Hindus were fighting for the right to build their temple on the masjid. The Muslims are fighting back. And once again, under British rule, the masjid is handed back to the Muslims. Over and over again, the British get involved and hand it back to the Muslims. India becomes independent. What year? 1947. Barely a few months later. This is on their mind. The target is there. Barely a few months later, hundreds of Hindu fanatics storm the masjid, kick out all the Muslims, and they construct inside the masjid mini Hindu temples. They put their mandirs, they put their gods. You know, the Hindus have their physical gods there. They place statues of Ram and they start doing their rituals inside the masjid. And they lay siege to the masjid. They don't allow any Muslim. Now, there is no British. Now you have the Indian government under Jawaharlal Nehru. Nehru is in charge. Nehru orders the army in, and in order to keep civil order, Nehru decides to shut the facility down. Neither Muslim nor Hindu. Neither Muslim nor Hindu. Barbed wires come around, and so the Babri Mosjid becomes just a monument. Nobody can go there. Well, it might be a monument, but in the hearts of the Muslims, in the hearts of the Hindus, it occupies an important place. Again, it's a symbolic battle taking place. So for the next 30 years, minor skirmishes happen again and again. I'm not going to go over every single one of them. Minor skirmishes happen. And then in the year 1987, one of the most popular Indian television series is produced.
Okay, we're going to come to the television series in a minute. But let's talk about the riots. So Hindu fanatics, you know, he described as he was saying that Hindu fanatics kicked the Muslims out. What else has happened? Bombay riots. Let me give you an example. Historian Barbara Metcalf has described the riot as an anti-Muslim pogrom, where the official death toll was 575 Muslims, 275 Hindus. Who killed the Hindus? What else has happened? In neighboring Pakistan, another basket case, 30 temples, 30 Hindu temples were destroyed the very next day. In Bangladesh, hundreds of thousands, not just 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or any numbers for that, but hundreds of thousands of people from Bangladesh had to flee after these Babri Mosjid riots. 1991, when the mosque was finally demolished, finally destroyed, hundreds and thousands of Bangladeshi people fled Bangladesh. Hindus. Even Middle East, even United Kingdom. Okay. And some reports suggest that in Pakistan, as many as 100 temples, were destroyed. Now let's go back to what our scholar has to say.
In fact, according to statistics, it is said this television series is the most watched television series in the planet. No other television series in any country has been watched by more people than this series. And it is a reenactment of the Mahabharata. It is a religious series, around 80 episodes, produced in 1987. By the way, all of them are on YouTube. You can watch them on YouTube, little sections.
Just a quick correction, it's not Mahabharata, it's Ramayana. 1987 series that he was referring to is Ramayana.
And this television series is about the god Ram. And it mentions Ayodhya and the birth of Rama in this temple. This, by the way, this television series, it is said that when it used to be broadcast, India would shut down. It is said that the smallest of villages, they pooled their resources to buy TVs for the first time. And everybody in the village would just come Sunday afternoon, whatever it was, and it was just a weekly routine for the whole country. Almost 1 billion people would watch this TV series, like India would shut down. And of course, it is pure propaganda. By the way, this television series had a lot to do with the popularization of RSS and the BJP. You have to understand the power of media, O Muslims. The power of media. Not comparing the two, but when we watch something like Ertugrul, how do we feel? I'm not comparing the two, but there's a positive side, right? That it brings some sense of whatnot. Well, what if it's blatant propaganda like this series?
What is blatant propaganda like this series? Now I need to really, highlight this point, because I really take offense when he mentions about Ramayana being a propaganda. Okay, there are two great epics that comes out of India. And one, of course, is Ramayana. The other one is Mahabharata. He made a mistake when he was, when he was trying to referring to Ramayana. He was saying that Mahabharata is about Krishna. Okay, Ramayana is about Rama. Okay, Ayodhya, Rama's birth and his exile, his life, and all those things. So he was saying that this TV series was nothing but a propaganda. So what is the message of Ramayana? Again, I have to be, as I said, I took offense when he mentioned that this TV series was a propaganda. What lessons can you learn from Ramayana? Let me give you a couple of lessons that I personally take from this series. Upholding of the Dharma. Victory of good over evil. Okay. Rama defeated Ravana. That was the victory of good over evil. The establishment of Dharma, righteousness. The second thing that comes is the loyalty to the family, to his father. To save the face of his father, Rama went into exile for 14 years. Went into the forest for 14 years. And during that time, his wife was abducted. And Rama walked 5,000 miles to rescue his wife. His loyalty to his wife. Love story. You saw many true love stories. How many of them had a husband who came to the forest for the sake of his father and then lost his wife and then decided to walk 5,000 miles on feet to rescue her? Okay. Loyalty to the family, to the wife. And finally, of course, leadership, Ram Rajya. I believe you heard this notion that is being said quite often in the Indian media. What is the Ram Rajya? What is the kingdom of Ram? When he got back his throne after all this struggle, being exiled into the forest, fighting demons, rescuing his wife, when he came back to reclaim his throne, his subjects raised question against his wife, against the fidelity, against the chastity of his wife. And then goddess Sita, Rama's wife, going through all these things, she decided to give up her mortal life. She said that, okay, now I am going to, go underground. I will give up my life and I will go underground, because this criticism, this questioning about her chastity has become so unbearable that she finally decided to give up herself. And Rama had to bow down to the wishes of the subject, because he was the king. He was the king. These are the lessons that we learn from Ramayana. Being a just king, being loyal to the family, being a lover, being a true lover, and of course, upholding righteousness, sacrifice. This is what we learn from Ramayana. And this guy was saying that this was propaganda. Now, of course, he can say this is propaganda. So what do we learn from Quran? Now, I showed you a couple of examples of the teachings of Quran just a couple of minutes ago. What else do we learn from Quran? In chapter 4, verse 24. In chapter 4, verse 24, it talks about gang raping women in front of their husband. Quran talks about gang raping women in front of their husband. Right hand's possession. Right hand's possession, that if you go and invade someone's territory, you can take captive of their women and you can rape them in front of their husband. Chapter 4, verse 24. Divorcing prepubescent girls. Muhammad was a pedophile. We all know that. Right? Muhammad was a pedophile. Not only he was happy being a pedophile, he had to preach it to the entire humanity. Chapter 65, verse 1 to 4. Divorcing prepubescent girls. It talks about divorcing prepubescent girls. Chapter 65, verse 1 to 4. The next verse, chapter 66, verse 1 to 5. Do you know what it talks about? Cheating. Raping a slave girl in the house of his wife Hafsa on her own bed. Maria the Copt. He had a son, Ibrahim. Muhammad had a son named Ibrahim. And how did this son was born? Out of an illicit, illegal relationship, extramarital affair, after raping a slave girl on the house of his wife Hafsa on her own bed. These are the moral teachings, and again there are many others. We smile on the face while our hearts curse them. Holy Quran chapter 3 verse 28. Lying and deception. Ka'b bin al-Ashraf, Abu Afak, Asma bint Marwan, Kinana. Savagery and barbarism. The names that I have just given you, Abu Afak, Ka'b bin al-Ashraf, Kinana, just Google this name, see what comes up. Asma bint Marwan, see what comes up. Savagery and barbarism, lying and deception, tribalism. Muslims are the best of all creatures, And the verse that I shown you, chapter 98, verse 6, non-Muslims are the worst of all creatures. These are the things that we learn from Islam. So what should you expect? When you compare Ramayana to the teachings of Muhammad, it is not surprising that this guy will say that, oh, this is but a propaganda. Like, I am not surprised to the least. And one final point, he mentioned a lot about Babur being a very literate person. Now, let me quickly show you one last thing before we wrap up. That is about how literate Babur was. At Kabul, okay, at Kabul, this is again his own memoir. Because of the low revenue generated by his mountain kingdom, Babur began his expedition to India. In his memoir, he wrote, "My desire for Hindustan has been constant. It was in the month of Shaban." He was a very literate person, but he couldn't avoid, or he couldn't think about anything else other than looting a country like India. Why did these savages, these barbarians, came to India? Because India was the richest of all lands. This very literate person couldn't find a job. Going back to Prophet Muhammad, who was Prophet Muhammad? What was his livelihood? Caravan robber. He used to rob caravans. Because why? Because he was unemployable. He couldn't read. He had no education, unskilled. He has no education. He is completely unskilled. He's an unemployable man. And because these are unemployable men, they couldn't do anything else. That's when they decided to rob the neighboring countries like India, for instance. And he mentioned, Dr. Yasir Qadhi mentioned about his poetry. Let me quickly show you about his poetry. Again, it's all in Wikipedia. Anybody, a 5-year-old, if you're a 5-year-old who can do a research, like who can do Google, 5 minutes, this information will come up. I have become a desert wanderer for Islam. Like he was saying that he is a beggar, pretty much. Like in the last slide, I shown you that he was running out of cash. Again, he was unemployed. He is uneducated. So what you can do? You have to rob other nations. You have to rob other countries. That is why these savages came to India. Now he is talking about poetry. So what is his poetry? He is a desert wanderer for Islam, having joined battle with infidels and Hindus. You remember when Yasir Qadhi was saying that no riots, no animosity, no fighting? Babur himself, he wrote poetry. What he says himself, having joined battle with infidels and Hindus. This is his own writing. I readied myself to become a martyr. God be thanked, I became a Ghazi, a martyr, whatever. He himself is saying, I fought, I invaded India, I fought the infidels, and Yasir Qadhi was saying that, oh, I forgot the date he was referring to, 15 something. No riots, no animosity, no fighting. With that note, I would thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something out of this. And I wish to learn something from you as well, that these kind of people like Yasir Qadhi, who have a large following and who are brainwashing the generations with hatred, with misinformation, is this going to make our society better? Is this kind of propaganda? He himself was talking about propaganda. Now, the information that I gave you, you can go ahead and verify all this information. This is a court case. These documents have been verified. These documents have been provided to the court. there is already a level of verification, and the person who did present this information, Dr. Meenakshi Jain, is the one who has been featured in this episode, in my video. And you saw the evidence, the knowledge, the information that is already available in Wikipedia in public domain. Now, with all this information, do you really honestly believe that Dr. Yasir Qadhi was telling the truth? And if this kind of misinformation propagates in our society, what should we expect? Do we expect, or should we expect, a better society, a society with inclusion, with constructive dialogue? Or are we going to see more violence? Are we going to see more friction, more animosity within the community? Thank you for listening, and I will catch up with you on the next one. Bye for now.